Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Hansen, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Hansen vs. Predators. Special guest this evening, special topic I want to talk about, a very important topic, one that many of you have been asking about for a long time. With me, my good friend and colleague Bob Bianchi, who is a former chief prosecutor and now a noted defense attorney in the tri-state area here. We're in New York City, and let's launch right into it. But first, I want to tell you that after we chat for a little bit, I want to hear from you, as always, and take your questions, either for me or for Bob. You may recognize Bob because when we were doing the Crime Watch Daily show, Bob was on a lot talking about various criminal cases. So, Austin Jones, 26-year-old former YouTube sensation, hundreds of thousands of followers. He was an a cappella singer. He traded his fame a little bit based upon his rough youth. He sang about that. He became very popular with young teenage girls. Come to find out, over a period of years, he was grooming these young women, these fans online, and coercing them into sending explicit videos. He has recently pleaded guilty and is looking at 10 years in federal prison. Bob, have you ever seen a case quite like this with somebody who is famous, who capitalized on that fame, notoriety, loyal, young, impressionable fans, and drew them into this type of activity?
I think you see it all the time, Chris, to be honest with you. People are using their popularity and their fan base to kind of say, hey, listen, if you do this for me, that for me, the other thing for me, if you're really a fan, then you come take care of me in a not so good way, sexual way, or give me photographs, and you'll really prove that you're a fan. He did it a little bit differently because he did it all online, and it was pretty prolific. There were at least 30 cases. He pled guilty to 6 of which could have carried a life sentence. I think he got a pretty good deal here from the U.S. attorneys, and he could have been looking at a lot more time based upon my experience both as a prosecutor and a defense lawyer.
What I find interesting about this case is that this predatory behavior surfaced years ago. He had a tour canceled. He was warned in a way, and it wasn't until he kept at it and kept grooming these young women online in a very explicit way, saying, if you're my number one fan, you'll do this for me. And on the videos, you hear the girls say, I'm 14. Do you like this? Do you like that? And he's coaching them through this. Going back to the fact that he was warned and didn't cut it out, wasn't he asking for this?
Chris, nobody knows better than you that these guys have something where they just can't help themselves. I mean, look at all the things that you did in your career, where I would look as a fan on your show in fascination that they come back another time after something like this. So it's a compulsion that I don't think they can help themselves with. And let's not forget, with this kid, he was actually asking the young girls to continually state, as they're exposing their genitals, their age. He wanted them to tell their age.
So there's no mistake here, no possibility that he thought they were older. He knew they were young. He exploited them and groomed them because they were young. And they even confirmed that in the videos.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was describing to them what kind of clothes to wear, what kind of sexual positions he wanted them to be in, the various things that he wanted them to do as far as the action films, as far as the videos are concerned. And let's not forget, under the federal system, Chris, a video isn't just considered one pornographic picture. Every still frame of that video is considered an image of pornography. And where I think a lot of people get caught up and don't realize, is something I was talking to you about offline a little bit, is that even if you were of the age of consent, in other words, if you're 16 in New Jersey or 17 here in New York, you could have lawful sex with that person. But if they're under the age of 18 and you take a pornographic photo of them, you are going to go down.
Wait, so you're telling me that if the age of consent is 16 in a state,
right,
it would be legal to have sexual relations with somebody who is older, no matter what age, but to photograph that person in a pornographic or sexually suggestive way would still be illegal until the age of 18.
Yeah, and let's not forget, it's illegal under state law, it's illegal under federal law. A lot of these guys, I've had clients like this that have gotten charged in both state and federal. You're fighting a two-front war with that. But if you're under the age of 18 and you transport that person to another state where the age of consent is higher, or if you take a pornographic video. Now here, let's not forget, it wasn't just receipt. He only pled guilty to receipt, but he was actually charged with production, and that means that you actually asked a person to help produce an image of child pornography. So that could have led to a minimum 15-year sentence to life with all the consecutive counts he had.
Child pornography is especially horrifying because not only was the victim victimized and taken advantage of once, but the victim is re-victimized with each and every viewing of that image or that video.
Right, and what you see is obviously there's a power relationship. These are young girls usually, although there have been men that have been in this, young boys have been in this situation. They're not mature enough to make that kind of decision, and that's why the pornography laws are so harsh as they are, because that image lives forever. And that's why you may see that the federal government says pornographic videos under the age of 18, even if the sex is consensual, the photograph is not, because we're worried about the lasting repercussions of this on the victim's life.
From a prosecutorial standpoint, did Austin Jones get a break here? Did he get off easy, even with a 10-year federal prison sentence?
Yeah, I mean, I have handled these cases, so I know very particularly what the general plea offers are for these things. So he was both production, receipt, enticement. He was using the internet, which is an additional crime. What they call in the federal system the relevant conduct, which is in the plea agreement, is pretty egregious. And based upon what I've normally seen, because you have multiple victims here, 30 in all that they investigated, 6 that he was charged with, in terms of 2 charged with, and the other 4 were relevant conduct. I was surprised not to see a recommendation of 15 to 20 years.
Earlier, he got jammed up and there was some public shaming that went on, and he actually made a video apologizing for this activity, but yet turned around and continued to solicit these young women online.
Yeah, and I think that that's what a lot of people don't get. When I was the boss and I was making decisions, I was looking at what is the conduct, what is the societal interest to punish and deter, but also let's not forget about rehabilitation, and that sometimes people get themselves in a jam who have lived an otherwise lawful life. This kid has none of those things in his favor. He had an opportunity to stop, he didn't. He took advantage of young people and multiple people. So to me as a prosecutor, this would be a guy I'd want to send the message that this is what the pornography law was all about.
His lawyer claims that Jones was victimized as a child by an abusive, sexually abusive, alcoholic father, that he used this music to escape this horrifying upbringing, and that a lot of this activity for which he pleaded guilty is a result of that horrifying environment. Is that a mitigating circumstance? Does that mean anything at all to you?
It would mean something to me as a prosecutor, but 95% of the people that come across my desk, Chris, as a prosecutor, are either mentally ill, have addiction issues, or were abused themselves. So while I'm sympathetic to that issue, as a prosecutor, I have to take egregious conduct and things that can really affect the lives of young people and make a point. And what bothered me most about this is that once he knew that he could have gotten in trouble, he didn't stop the conduct, he didn't seek help, he continued to victimize, and that's something I couldn't overlook. So I take it into consideration, but probably not that much.
What message does this send to parents, whose kids are online, on YouTube, multiple hours in a day, and there is this fan worship and this celebrity attached to anybody who's hawking a product or showing off their talents in digital fashion?
I used to go around and giving lectures to parents how to target harden their children and themselves from this kind of predatory behavior. And I was actually kind of surprised that they would talk about privacy and I don't want to invade my child's privacy. Just yours truly believes, no, invade your child's privacy. Right. You need to know what's going on the internet. It's very difficult to patrol because that predator is literally coming into your home and into their devices. So it's very easy for them to slip in without you knowing about it. So you got to be vigilant.
I always tell parents, when I give a speech someplace about online safety, remind your kids that just because you know them online doesn't mean you know them in real life. But when you have celebrity involved, these kids feel like they know Austin Jones, like he's singing to them.
Right, exactly.
About their young teen angst.
And that's part of the aggravating factors of this case, because he was actually dangling to some of those victims that, hey, I can make you a model. Hey, I can make you a superstar too. And this person believes this.
All right, guys, thanks for your patience. We had a little technical difficulty there on the channel. Hansen versus Predators. Bob Bianchi, my guest. It's interesting because we're starting to see cases now where kids, and we've seen these cases for a long time, kids are sharing explicit photos. And even when it's consensual, there could still be criminal criminal charges here.
You know, Chris, when I was in the Prosecutors Association, each of the 21 county prosecutors in New Jersey would meet each month. And when this first started coming out, and I was listening to my colleagues were charging, say, 2 of 14-year-old kids who were having a consensual relationship with one another, and they're taking photos of one another and they're sharing it. Well, they've actually violated the pornography law. They've produced, distributed, and received child pornography. Personally, I thought that was a little harsh. I think that prosecutors need to use the rule of reason. These weren't people that were predatory. They were in dating relationships, and I didn't think that anybody would have known, especially at that age, that they were doing something that was a violation of law. And that could tag on with you, especially if you get like a Megan's Law scenario, for a considerable period of time beyond the time that you turn 18.
And theoretically, that person could be forced to register as a sex offender for some lengthy period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's where I think that I've always had a problem with, where I think that there are laws that are put into place and they're for good reasons, but then sometimes prosecutors are using them in a very mechanistic way, and they're not looking at the totality of the circumstances. And I used to say to my staff all the time, our job is not to be here to hit flies with a sledgehammer. Our job is to deter conduct, make the community safe, but also rehabilitation and compassion where it's appropriate. So while I'm not a big fan of 2 14-year-olds taking pictures and charging them with the production and distribution of child pornography, your viewers and parents that may be watching should educate their children that in fact, another prosecutor may see it very differently.
Because this happens. We've seen entire schools, middle schools and high schools, in turmoil because of this picture sharing that goes on. There was a school in Virginia a few years back where there was a massive investigation. It did not result in criminal prosecution, but these kids were all hauled in, and some very embarrassing pictures were floating around. And as you and I know, once they're out there forever.
Yeah, and it's funny, the speed with which I have
delete doesn't mean anything.
Delete means nothing. I could tell you that for a fact. But you know what? I see one right now that we're dealing with, that I'm dealing with personally, where one guy took a photograph and sent it to a friend, and by the next time you knew it, hundreds and hundreds of students in the school saw it. Now you can imagine how victimized the child is, or the young lady, and you can imagine the parents. And now all of these people that shared it are all being investigated for the receipt and distribution of child pornography. All of them have to get lawyers, and their whole lives are upended. And you know, depending on how the prosecutor views that case, there may be some people that suffer some serious consequences.
Was there any evidence that Austin Jones shared these videos?
I didn't see that in any of the materials that I read. It just seemed like a perverted attempt to use his fame and popularity to entice, and that's one of the charges he was actually charged with, which is another whopper of an offense, to entice these young people to give him video so that he could use it for his own sexual gratification. And as far as the proofs of this case were concerned, he gave a confession to law enforcement authorities explaining that very thing, that he was using it for his own sexual gratification.
And was there any evidence that he actually tried to meet any of these young women in person?
I didn't see anything like that in the file as well. And again, remember, we only have an information from the federal authorities because he pled guilty, so we don't have the whole discovery or file. But I think that would have been something that would have come out in the information. I didn't see that.
All right, we're back live now on the YouTube channel Hansen versus Predators. I guess tonight, rain and flooding here in New York City. Last night we had a tornado touchdown in New Jersey, outside of New York City, and tonight those storm clouds are apparently interfering with our internet signal.
Or it could be that we're so cool that we froze the YouTube.
Exactly. I don't know about that. I think we beat the median age here on the YouTube. But that brings up a great issue here, Bob, and that is with the millions and millions of people on YouTube and all these other social media platforms. How many other Austin Jones are out there taking advantage of what could be construed as a cult-like following?
Lots. I mean, I don't know the statistics, but I can tell you that one time when we were doing sex crimes investigations in the prosecutor's office, somebody came with a program that law enforcement has that they can tell who is looking at known images of child pornography at any given time in a geographic location. And they ran that program in my county to show me at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I was shocked that there were like 75 people that were actually on their computers, and they were actually looking at known images of child pornography. We know that it's an epidemic. You know this, Chris, and the stuff that you're doing. Our guys would just drop into the middle of a chat room and pose to be a teenager, and within seconds, they were getting people who turned out to be adults trying to manipulate them.
What responsibility does YouTube or any other media channel or platform have to police this? Or is it impossible? We did a story some years ago about Craigslist. And I was stunned when we found out that at any given time worldwide, there were like 60 billion people on Craigslist. And Craigslist employs 40-some people, or did at the time. How can you even manage that or keep track of it? I guess there are algorithms and things, but what responsibility do the social media platforms have here?
I personally don't think they're going to have a lot of responsibility unless they fail to do something that would be reasonable to be expected that they should know. So say, for example, this guy comes on their radar, Austin, and they don't do anything about it, and they find out about it.
And we should say that YouTube did act in this case and took
Right.
the channel down.
Yeah, but I don't know how much it's worthy of trying to limit what these companies are doing. There can be some restrictions that are put on that are reasonable, but it is such a prolific platform, all these things, that to me, if they follow reasonable protocols and things slip through, you got to target harden the end user as opposed to so much monitoring, in my opinion, the companies.
And then I think the other issue is, while there are reporting mechanisms in place, and we get this all the time with hackers trying to steal our copyrighted material from either, the website or purloin it from YouTube, it's hard. And there can be an abuse in the reporting system in that if somebody doesn't like you, in one of these online forums, they can make false accusations.
Yeah.
And you see this all the time. So it's sort of still the wild, wild west in a way.
Yeah, no, that's a
And
really
how do you
good point.
police it?
I think that's a really good point. Like we would see that when it's going to sound like a little bit of a tortured analogy, but when we had the harassment, intimidation, and bullying law in the schools, which is a great law in theory, it's a zero tolerance policy. Any kind of bullying pursuant to the definition, then there's certain actions law enforcement had to take. I was prosecutor when that got enacted in New Jersey, but what we started to see was that parents started calling in, complaining about the captain of the football team or the head of the cheerleading squad, and when we finally got done doing a deep dive of an investigation, it took a lot of resources away from real crimes. We found out it was being done because they were trying to get the kids knocked off so that their kids, their children, could advance.
We've seen it in the suburbs where, the police departments, with good faith and good intent, have a anonymous tip line for underage parties. And what was happening in Connecticut, at least years ago, was when kids wouldn't get invited to the popular party, they'd drop a dime on the other popular kids.
Yeah,
so there's always abuse there. All right, well, let's take some questions from some of the folks who are viewing this tonight. And Vincent is monitoring that. What do we have, sir?
One of your audience members asked both of you, how do you keep your composure when you're interviewing or going against a predator?
The question is, how do you keep your composure? Bob, for you, it's in court, I imagine. As a prosecutor, prior to being a defense lawyer, it's, how do you deal with the case? And, I know from our conversations, you not only got the paperwork, but you oftentimes made the crime scene, which could be very, jarring, I would imagine.
Yeah, our lawyers were very intimately involved in the interviewing and investigative process. So I thought that was a better way of doing it. No disrespect to the police piece to it, but a lot of times the police piece doesn't know in the end analysis in the courtroom the defenses that are raised. So to me, working collaboratively was important. To your audience member's question, I've interviewed a number of murder suspects, a number of child predators, and you just keep your calm, keep your cool. You act very responsible, reasonable. The idea with them is to keep them talking. Keep them talking, make them relax, because you need to do a job. And I'll tell you, to maybe a little bit to a sidebar to that point, it becomes very difficult with my sex crimes prosecutors. There was one in particular that was there for many, many years. And I've seen this happen, and it's only in this unit, not in homicide, not gangs, not drugs, sex crimes. They get the blank stare. And at a certain point in time, I had to call, there's one person in particular, I get goosebumps when I'm actually thinking about it, because I told her, you need to get out of the unit. No disrespect for you. You've done a great job. You've seen too much. And she had that tough exterior because she's trained. These are very highly trained prosecutors. They go through a lot of training, so it's hard to let them go. But she finally broke down and cried and said, I'm glad that you made me do it because I would never ask. And you're right, I can't take it anymore. It's very hard on you emotionally.
For me, in these situations, and obviously, I don't do it every day, but I've done it enough times to figure out that you really have to have a genuine curiosity as to what brought that person into that situation. So I've had potential predators, killers, financial scammers, you name it, I've interviewed them, who initially don't want to talk, and finally you say to them, look, just help me to understand. You're in a jam here, and nothing I can do for you is going to change that. But help me to understand. Explain this to me, how you got yourself into the position. And more often than not, you get results.
Chris, your job and my job are no different that way, and that's exactly the right approach. Instead of going in there, we should tell our detectives with guns and badges and yelling out the Miranda rights. I knew one of the best guys I ever knew. He would read the Mirandas in such a way, hey, I want to be fair with you, I want to be honest with you. He'd read Miranda and said, now, am I being fair with you? And the guy would actually thank him for reading the Miranda rights. But then you get them into this space where you say, hey, I just want to understand. I know you're not a monster. I know you're not a horrible person, but help me understand so that I can go to my boss or I can go to my superior, and maybe this will help you out.
I have to explain this.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing that I find interesting is sometimes you just say, you see how this looks, and we see it. I was in editing today because on the website HansenVersusPredators.com, we're doing, we're taking a look at some of the cases we've done, but we get into some of the material that's never aired before, and it's pretty compelling. It's even interesting for me to go back and watch. But you see how these guys suddenly walk in, they try to take control, and they put their boundaries down in the room, and they're really confident, and okay, I made it. Okay, there's a 12, 13-year-old girl there, and all of a sudden they see me, and it changes. So how do I bring them back in? I was only half jokingly say it's sort of like being an anesthesiologist. You're hovering this person between life and death until you get your job done, and then it's off to the police.
Right, and you know what I find with this kind of offender? I think each offender class has a different kind of mentality to them. If you can get them to talk, they always think they can talk their way out of it.
I've seen it hundreds of times. I say, okay, I sort of understand that, and then you've got the transcript.
Yeah, and you're reading them the
course,
text
and
message.
it's like, well, explain this, and they honestly think that, okay, I'm doing all right, I'm okay here, and then flip and, well, what about this? And it says you want to do this, that, and the other thing to this young girl, and how do you square that? And then they think, okay, well, I passed this, and then of course, you're free to go, and that's when the authorities start their work and they're arrested. But, it was interesting also watching in detail the Fairfield, Connecticut police do their interrogations. And like every law enforcement agency with which I've worked, I mean, they're very good. And particularly poignant was the case of this Ambrosio, Vincent Ambrosio. And he was a younger guy, and you sort of could feel sorry for him, except for the fact that when you watch the police interrogation, and I learned from this because it's not a question I asked, but it was a very important question, which was, you thought you were talking to a 12-year-old girl. You sent pictures of your privates to that girl. Do you realize that at 12, that could be the first experience she has seeing the male anatomy, and that could scar her or frame her, shape her for life? And even the predator in that case, Ambrosia, said, God, I didn't even think of it that way. But that was an example of getting at somebody to elicit the truth and emotion. I just thought it was, while it seems very common sense in hindsight, it was remarkable in that it really elicited a result there.
I found that sexual abusers, sexual predators are extremely manipulative. And they know what you want to hear. So, I mean, I trust the story you tell. But when I've listened to them say, I never really thought about it that way. And to me, that's in my mind, that's their way of trying to mitigate, hey, I'm not a bad guy. Right. Geez, now that you say it, it was a wrong thing to do.
Too. That's a good point, yeah. All right, Vincent, any other questions?
Yeah, Market Me TV wants to know, which was the most concerning moment ever during the show with which predator?
The question being, what's the moment that concerned us most with any of the predators throughout our investigations? I mean, that's probably a 10-way tie for first, but I think any time somebody talks about bringing a weapon, and this presents a challenge for law enforcement too, and for us, if we believe that the potential predator has a weapon with them, and we can't verify that it's not on them when they walk in, and we do a fair amount of research on the person's background prior to them getting to the location, the police will just arrest them, outside the house. The last thing we want is a weapon in there. But I think those are the most frightening parts
I think I've seen an episode or two with you, or at least in my career, where when you go into the vehicle, you find not only weapons, but like duct tape and handcuffs and...
Well, we saw that in the most recent investigation that aired on Crime Watch Daily. You were probably a part of that show, and they did go through Stephen Buchanan's car, and here's a fellow who showed up for sex with a young girl, and he was a cable TV company employee, so he was in people's houses every day. He was on the waiting list to become a police officer, and in his car was a loaded handgun. He was a veteran, Army veteran from Iraq, and duct tape, camera, knife. It's alarming.
Yeah, Chris, you also bring up to me, a public service announcement. Now, my wife thinks I'm crazy, but 95% of the time I've been proven right. And you know my wife. She's an
I know.
easygoing person, but I worry about, I hate to say this, but I've seen so much that I worry about the pizza delivery guy.
Oh.
Or the cable guy, as you mentioned.
We're the background checks
there. Anybody you bringing in, a lot of these predators put themselves into places where they will have access. And that's why I always say to people, here's another public service announcement. When you go away or you're not in your house, don't be posting on Facebook and on social media your great trip in Hawaii or wherever you're going, because you're opening yourself up to be victimized. Give the pictures when you come back.
Even the, little innocent day-to-day pictures or videos that I take, whatever, of personal stuff with my kids, I typically don't put those up until after I'm in a different location.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why advertise?
Right.
And my kids are older, two of them are in this business. So, I worry more about one of them covering a tornado in Oklahoma, and getting injured than the other stuff. But you do still worry, and that's true. I mean, you don't know who's coming in your house. It's like hiring a stranger for day labor. The percentages are with you that this is going to be a good, honest, hardworking guy, but you gotta be smart about.
Well, you got to let them know, and I don't know if it's sexist, but I've gotten to a point right now where, unless it's absolutely necessary, I don't know. I keep getting back to pizza. It must be an Italian thing. But I'm getting the pizza. I'm answering the door. I make sure our new little rescue pup, the legal beagle Holly, let her bark as loud as she wants until we tell her to stop. Because I try to target hard, and so that somebody says, "Hey, if I ever want to do something, this is not the place to do it." To the extent I can.
Look. Typically, whether it's dealing with a car problem or whatever is going on, just take it from there, because it's all the way around easier.
And another thing too, Chris, that's really I was, when I got the job as the head prosecutor in 2007, all the way to about 2009, 10, 11, I had this sensibility that there was this bubbling level of mental illness that was going on in the world that were just below the radar. And the more I was seeing social media explode, I was wondering, is this activating some of these people? And sure enough, I believe, people ask me this all the time, the difference between the homicide cases I tried as a baby prosecutor compared to the ones that I did when I left being a prosecutor are more twisted and bizarre and peculiar, and so are the sex crimes.
Look, I'm this. Look, you see enough stuff over 37 years, and the kids all only half jokingly say, "Well, don't tell Dad or don't tell Chris because he'll be overprotective of us."
Yeah, because you've seen the thing.
Can't ruin the fun though. Vincent.
Yeah, Market V TV has another question. Do you sympathize with younger predators in their teens over middle-aged predators? Do you feel sorry for them, or more lenient with the senior ones?
The question is, do you feel sorry for the younger ones? It's hard to feel sorry for any of them, given the potential damage they could do to an innocent child. And when people say, well, this wouldn't happen unless you're running an investigation, well, it does happen. It happens all the time. It happens more than we know, and that's just not anecdotal. There's some evidence behind it. But what if I wasn't there? What if the police weren't there, and there was a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl? There's going to be trouble.
Yeah,
we've seen it happen.
It makes no difference whether they're youthful offenders, they would put it, or whether they're middle-aged. But I've noticed that there seems to be more of a visceral reaction when it is a middle-aged person. And I think that may have something to do with maturity, or even the more ugliness that the distance between the ages is so stark that they should have known better, and that they manipulated or had the ability to manipulate the child more. It just seems to me, it doesn't make a difference legally, but I think that people see it differently.
Take a look at the case we had in Petaluma, California. A guy was well into his 40s and had 2 daughters and a wife and was a doctor and executive at a biomedical firm. And here he is, grooming who he thought was a young teenage girl. I will say that, though, in my experience, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, of course, but when you do see somebody who's 19, 20, 21, clearly illegal what they're up to, but you see more of the kind of guy who can get probation, a short sentence, computer monitoring, and say, you ever do this again, you're going away for 10 years. And I think you have a better chance in that case of turning somebody around. I think you might find somebody who is socially awkward, says stuff online they wouldn't normally say face to face, and says, well, she may be 13 or 14 now, but in a couple of years it'll be legal and we'll be okay. And if this works out, I'm fine. It just is, has a tough time meeting people. Doesn't make it right. But I think that's more of a candidate for probation as opposed to, a heavy sentence right off the bat.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I mean, I agree with your assessment. Again, I think that the more there's an age gap, the more ugliness it's felt in the community. So I think that's a great question that the audience member's asking. But the thing is today with these laws, there's very few people getting probation for this kind of conduct.
We saw in the last investigation 11 guys and 11 prison sentences. And even the youngest one, who was 19 at the time, you may want to feel sorry for somebody, but he's a towering figure with a black coat and a black hat, and he swoops in to hug the girl. It's frightening. And he possesses just the same level of danger as the 60-year-old guy who walked in.
Well,
Same thing.
Your investigations were interesting to me, and I actually started to try to come together with a plan when I became prosecutor, actually model what it was that you were doing. And there's a lot of logistics to it. Each state is different as to what they allow legally, so on and so forth. But there's a huge difference. There are some defenses. There's some people that are on that computer, and they just feel they're kind of anonymous, and whether they're just playing around or they're just flirting with danger is one issue. But when you got people that are actually proactively going out to meet these individuals and or with weapons and things like you're talking about, that to me is a completely different predator.
Right, exactly. Vincent?
We have some people in the audience asking about future investigations.
Future investigations. Well, we get that a lot, and we are going to do more predator investigations. And I know you guys want to know more detail about it, but at this point, because they're getting ready to be active, there's not much I can say. But I can assure you that we're working with a number of municipalities across the country, and our people who are decoys and all the folks who work in production with us, and we're doing it. So we'll get back to you on that shortly. In the meantime, as you know, we've gotten a lot of material pulled together that you haven't seen. A lot of this stuff aired in pieces on Crime Watch Daily and has been on the internet. But the way we're putting it out now, for instance, tomorrow night on HansenVersusPredators.com, we'll have a piece that takes a look at Joshua Colon, who was a plumber who showed up in our Fairfield, Connecticut investigation. It's pretty eye-opening to see what he was capable of doing. This is the fellow who came in to meet a 12-year-old girl. The decoy on site greets him. He brings dinner for one, a real romantic, doesn't even bring dinner for his prey. And he's got to use the bathroom right away. So he walks in the meantime, the decoy walks out, and I walk into the kitchen. So he goes into the bathroom seeing the decoy, who he called hot, and he comes out seeing me, not so hot. Maybe hot under the collar because of what he's doing, but that's about it. So, all right, one more question?
One more question. How did you two come together and meet, and what kind of cases have you worked on together?
We the question is, how did Bob and I first meet? And we met because Bob was one of the legal contributors on Crime Watch Daily, which was the syndicated show that we did for a couple of years. And Bob and some others would come on, and we'd face off on Wild About Trial and some other cases where Bob would take one point and another attorney, Misty Maris, or Jesse would take another side. And they're very lively, great conversations that really take these cases apart. And listen, I want to tell you just behind the scenes, I know tonight was a little herky-jerky getting started. We had some technical issues, but literally Bob got into the city and had to ditch his car because of flooding here The only reason he actually made it is because one of New York City's finest recognized him as that prosecutor and said, you can park the car here and we'll ticket it. Then he had to get in a cab, get across town to my office here where we're doing this tonight. And I was back and forth between a studio editing tomorrow's piece for the website. So it was kind of a crazy day, but we did it, my friend, and we'll do it some more. And we're going to continue to, tweak the production on this show and everything we do for YouTube and for the website as well. So it's exciting. We're off and running, and I appreciate you tuning in. And we will see you live here on YouTube next Wednesday at 8 Eastern. And we'll have that new material up on the website tomorrow. Take it easy. Talk soon.